Imagine this, you're the documentation lead at your company, and now your company has decided to merge with the big competitor. And your task now is to migrate both those documentation systems into one cohesive environment. This is exactly what happened to Ping Identity and ForgeRock. The two companies merged together, and I discussed this with Jodie Landis. She's the Senior Director of Technical Documentation at Ping Identity, and she had the task to convert over 48,000 pages of DITA content into AsciiDoc. So without further ado, let's go directly into the interview.
Great. So, as I mentioned before, I really want to know and get to know about your experience in migrating from a more complex system to AsciiDoc. So, what I'm really interested is about, firstly, your background. So, you've already stated in the Red Docs talk that you had a merger. So, it would be great if we can talk about this for a second. Then also about yourself. What was your role in this migration process? What was the goal behind it? How was the migration process? And yeah, how did you take the team with you, and what were your learnings? So a couple of questions. I'll try to guide you through it in a second. So maybe let's start with your background for now.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Jodie Landis. I am the Senior Director of Technical Documentation at Ping Identity. I have been with Ping. Actually, before the merger, I was with ForgeRock, and I started in September of 2021. So I'll be coming up on my 4-year anniversary. And basically, my role is to lead the documentation team here at Ping. And right now, we have a team of around 50 people, most of which are the writing team themselves, and we are spread out across, basically we're a global organization. So we have writers all over the US as well as in Europe, and we have a few people in Tel Aviv as well, and one in South Africa. And so I have been in technical writing for over 25 years. I've done everything from, user guides, user manuals. I've done training materials, technical marketing. I don't think there isn't anything out there that I haven't touched in terms of my experience. I've worked at some pretty large companies and some pretty small companies. I actually started at Microsoft a very long time ago. I actually started in inside sales, where I learned about technology because I came out of college without that knowledge very much. In fact, I didn't even know technical writing was a thing until I started working at Microsoft. Again, I worked for some smaller companies. I worked for Intel, working on developer oriented marketing materials. So yeah, that's a little bit of my background.
Great. And then let's talk about the merger. Maybe guide us through the decisions that you had, and what was the reason that after this merger you had to change the documentation setup?
Sure, absolutely. So just a little bit of history about that merger. So Ping was purchased by Thoma Bravo, which is a private equity firm, pretty large, in October of 2022. And then ForgeRock, which is where I came from, was purchased by Thoma Bravo in August of 23. And then pretty immediately, the two companies were merged together. And both companies were competing in the same market against each other, which is just a little background about what Ping does. We do identity and access management solutions. So really what we do is help our customers, and many of them are very large companies, help protect their customers as well as their employees and any business partners they have from having information stolen. So that's our job. That's what we do. We are headquartered in Denver, Colorado, but we have, again, offices all over the world. I mentioned our docs team, which has actually, we're at 34 writers now. We just onboarded 2 new writers yesterday. We have 2 editors and 4 content engineers and 3 managers. So when the merger happened, it became very clear pretty quickly that both teams, both documentation teams, had very different ways of writing and different methodologies and different systems. It could not be any more different. So we had to take kind of a staged approach. So, there's the near term projects that we wanted to do, which is really, it was just about making sure like we started referencing each other's documentation. So on the ForgeRock side, we have what we call backstage. That's where all the documentation and support, that's where all that information was. And so we knew right away we could at least, start linking to the Ping documentation, and the same for the Ping documentation site, linking to the ForgeRock doc. So that was one of our first things, which we could actually do fairly quickly. Because at that point, we weren't really sure which methodology we were going to go with. So on the ForgeRock side, we had AsciiDoc and docs as code methodology. And then on the Ping side, it was a DITA methodology. So it took us a few months to really kind of sit down. In fact, we did it in person for a couple of days to weigh the pros and cons of each. We had made the decision to go with AsciiDoc and docs as code for what you mentioned, Marvin, which is the fact that it's just faster, right? And honestly, we didn't really see a huge value in DITA because we weren't really reusing a lot of information as much as we thought we would be. And frankly, the tools we were using for the DITA implementation were very, very expensive. And so on the ForgeRock side, we had been using docs as code and AsciiDoc for several years. We had actually, even before my time, just before I came on board, had moved from DocBook to AsciiDoc and docs as code. And it was a process that had already been achieved. So we knew we could do that fairly quickly. And that was the other part too, right? The conversion of the content from DITA to AsciiDoc was going to be much faster than taking AsciiDoc and turning it into DITA, right? And we had to move really fast because we couldn't have writers doing two different processes, right? So we had to make a choice and we had to move very, very quickly. So, and it just so happened that ForgeRock had used almost all the tooling they used were either available, through engineering, through like, Git and things like that, or we could get tools just open source. So it was, honestly, we've spent very, very little money at all on any tools. I think the only money we really spent was like on, screen capturing software or something like that, but it was minimal. And so what was great about this process is in the end, once we did the conversion and we could stop using the DITA tools, so we were using Ixiosoft and Fluid Topics, we took all that money, which was significant, and we were able to hire 2 writers from that. So, I think that if we would have gone with DITA, it would have been a much longer, much more complex, much more expensive prospect. And I think that, AsciiDoc and docs as code gives us so much more flexibility. That was one of the requirements. It needed to be, nothing's ever future proof, but it needs to be really flexible. And those are just some of the reasons we made the decisions we did.
In your decision, did you already think about the team adoption there? Was this part of the discussion as well on how to onboard the people who didn't know AsciiDoc before, and how did you do that?
We did discuss it, and that kind of goes back to what I was saying, how it would have been a much harder and longer process if we would have onboarded the AsciiDoc folks to DITA, many of whom didn't have the knowledge and the background, and it's fairly complex, right? So we felt that onboarding the DITA writers would be much faster because there's just not as much involved, right? And honestly, the AsciiDoc training wasn't that hard. Almost anyone can pick it up. That's the brilliance of it. It's really, there's really only a few things that we ever use from an AsciiDoc perspective, dated 90% of the time, right? And so anyone can really learn it. The struggle was more Git,
Mm.
right? Learning Git and understanding Git. But the one thing that I felt very strongly about is that, and I think I mentioned this in my talk, is that it's very difficult for writers to find jobs these days without knowing Git. You really need to know it. And so I positioned it as this is actually helping you. Not that I would ever want people to leave, of course, but it just adds to your skill set, right? And you become more marketable if you know Git. It's not even a question these days. It's just like it's expected that technical writers know Git and know how to use it.
You said that it's very easy, but there's still some sort of learning curve, right? So did
Yes.
you have like a self-taught course? Did everybody just had to look at, I don't know, the AsciiDoc documentation, or what was your go-to approach to still learn the ropes?
Yeah. So what we did is we actually got together as a team.
Mm.
So we met at our headquarters in Denver. So we had the entire team fly in from all their different locations, and we took 4 days. And luckily, one of the reasons we were able to move so fast is because we had our what we call legacy ForgeRock writers already knew the process. They already knew how to do everything. And so we had a built-in training team already. And so those writers, those experienced writers, put together a training course and training process for the rest of the writers, the DITA writers. And so we did that on day one, was to go through and just train and get some hands-on experience. And then day 2 and 3 was really about, sitting down and breaking out into teams and start doing the cleanup work. At that point, most of the content had been converted to AsciiDoc from DITA. And so it proved to be a really great exercise, not only to learn and get trained the folks that needed to be trained, but we were able to provide feedback to our content engineer who was actually doing the conversion for other ways that we could clean up through the script he wrote to actually do the conversion, so that writers, again, the ultimate goal through the conversion was to have the writers spend as little time as possible having to clean up. We got several things out of that, training folks, but also updating our script so that it took care of more things for the writers that they wouldn't have to worry about later on.
That's great, hands-on, and also already add some value to your team. Great. In the process of the conversion, what was the biggest struggle? You said there was still some manual work involved. Was it like some elements, I don't know, admonitions, for example, are easy to migrate and other elements are not that easy? Or how can you differentiate between what was easy and what wasn't?
Yeah, it wasn't that it was the cleanup effort afterwards was hard. I mean, there was only so much the script could do, right? And funny enough, the stuff that we had to do afterwards for cleanup again wasn't hard. It was just a lot. So there would be like spacing in weird spots, and that would just throw off the rest of this ASCII doc, and those were just things that had to go in and get fixed, right? But compared to having to do all that by hand, I would say probably a good, 80-85% of the content was fine. It's just going, but honestly, the cleanup ended up being a great exercise for training, right? Because you're getting in and you're getting your hands dirty. You don't have to know everything right up front, right? You're just looking for specific things, like if there's an extra plus, right? Which then throws everything off. So it ended up being a great training exercise in the end.
Cool. Was there still from the from the legacy tools, the writers, did they sort of show some resistance on, hey, we've always done it another way, and this is way better in scenario XYZ? Or was that also because it was more, you chose the more nimble, the easy to learn solution, that these resistance points were easy to argue against? What would you say?
Yeah, I think definitely there was resistance. And I think that's just human nature, right? We want to stick with what we know, especially it's challenging for writers who we're doing all this while they're still doing their day job. We can't stop writing, which is why we had to move so quickly to get the team on a single process and single tools as quickly as possible. Because many of the writers had to, we had a 2 week period where we couldn't publish anything. We had to have a break so that we could do that full conversion. Now, what I mean by that is it's not that they're not writing, it's just we're not publishing anything, right? So that we can make the conversion. But writers would, continue to write what they needed in like a Google Doc or whatever, which then we could move over, right? But yeah, there was definitely resistance. But again, there were pros and cons no matter what direction we went, right? But what's really interesting is I've been getting more feedback and hearing more feedback now that there was definitely some questions about whether this was the right direction. And now I'm hearing a lot of, wow, this is actually really cool. And it's actually very easy to use and makes the process so much faster for the writing team. It would take a while in some cases because just of the tooling, right? We had issues with Ixiosoft and Fluids, to be honest, especially folks in Tel Aviv really had problems with Ixiosoft working for them. There would just be a huge lag time. And so now we don't have to deal with that anymore. We don't have to rely on other people publishing, other writers publishing. Anyone can publish anytime they want, right? So those are the things that I think people are starting to recognize and starting to really appreciate, and also having the ability to make the process work for them. So we've had multiple writers writing scripts to do things that they would have to do kind of by hand, right? So we have these includes that were there was an include within include, and that was just a leftover from the cleanup, right? So somebody went in and wrote a script to clean all that up, right? When we're talking thousands and thousands of pages, and those includes within includes literally gave me a headache when I tried to clean them up. So now those are cleaned up because somebody wrote a script for their documentation. So the flexibility and the ownership by the writers to make the tools work for them instead of people working for the tool was a major turning point for the team.
From my perspective, ownership only happens if you really take the people into those decisions, so they really feel inclined on optimizing and improving a situation if they see something that's not 100% correct beforehand. So sounds like a great starting point you did there. One more question regarding the metrics or return on invests. Did you track some numbers afterwards on, I don't know, decreasing time to publish rates or anything time-wise that you can share?
We did not track any of that. And I think mostly just because we were under such a huge time crunch, right? We knew we had to move and we had to move very fast. The fact that we did this in 10 months is still like blows my mind. Not only we changed processes, we changed, the products we use, we changed basically everything from scratch to build this new site from the ground up. I mean, honestly, I wouldn't even know where to start on trying to track those metrics. But, to me, the most important thing was the feedback from the writers, right? Is this working for them? And, now that we're a good 6-7 months into it, gosh, I can't believe it's, almost a year since we started like actually doing the conversion work. The questions we get now from the writers, they tend to be more complex, meaning that they're obviously got the basics underneath them and they feel comfortable and confident to go in and do their writing now daily, and now only questions and hacks that we have are more along the lines of that's not something I ever thought of before, right? But I just love how the writers are taking ownership and figuring things out on their own and not having to rely on a third party to help them, right? They can go do it themselves.
Cool. If you could turn back the time a year ago, is there something you would do differently in the migration approach?
Yeah, I think that one of the most challenging parts of the project was just project management in general. And if I could go back, we have a group here at Ping that does it's the Business Transformation Office, I believe is what they call it, and it's basically project and program management.
Mhm.
I think I would have asked for somebody on that team a little more forcefully than I did at the time to help us like herd the cats, right? And the other thing is we just didn't know what we didn't know, right? This was the first time we'd ever converted DITA documentation to AsciiDoc, not knowing what the pitfalls were. I'm amazed that we did it in such a short amount of time without really encountering too many huge roadblocks. I would say the one thing that really got us in the end, though, that we didn't foresee were the links. So we broke a lot of links when we updated to the new site. And I think we didn't realize there was a lot of tech debt because of in the past, Ping had moved to multiple solutions and multiple third parties even before the merger had happened. So we had people that had, links that were 5, 6, 7 years old that we just ran into tech debt. And we just finally had to say, we can't support that because we had no idea these links were just so convoluted. We would never be able to trace where those came from anymore. And so we just you have to kind of draw a line in the sand and say, look, we can't support these anymore. My one piece of advice would be, just make sure you have a good link tracking or a link conversion plan in the future when you're doing a project like this, where you're completely building a new site, right? It's not even about the AsciiDoc, it's about new site development and site replacement. Just make sure you have a good plan. Because it was also affected our docs linking out into our products themselves. So in the UIs, there are links to docs. So don't break those because that's what happened. And so we had to really scramble to make sure that we were able to address those.
Interesting. Yeah, I feel like there's a lot to unpack here, of course. I don't have any further real questions already. So would you say there's anything else we have not yet covered? Anything that you would still like to mention?
I guess I would just say, and I think I mentioned this in the talk, is that when, mergers and acquisitions happen all the time, right? And I'm sure the folks that attended the talk or, your audience has gone through it or will go through it at some point. And when you're bringing 2 or more teams together, I would say my one strongest piece of advice is get them working on a single project together. I had a few people talk to me after my talk and like, yeah, we're still very separate. We all have different, ways of doing things and nobody's come together and it's still very piecemeal. Like find a project that you all can work on together. Because that will start breaking down silos and start having you work together as a team. And this did that, right? We didn't have a choice. There was no other option. So, yeah.
Okay, great. Then I would say we're done with the interview already. Thank you so much for your time. It was great chatting with you. I tried to keep it as little as possible on the topics that you've covered already at the Write Little Docs Portland talk to just get some things basically for myself, which I like after seeing the talk, I had like, okay, which elements might be interesting to convert? What was the big struggle? So yeah, thanks again, and I hope you have a nice day. Talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks so much, Marvin.
Thanks again to Jodie for her insights. If you have a similar story you want to share and discuss with me, feel free to reach out either via LinkedIn or via YouTube comments or direct messages. I'm always happy to discuss. I'd see you in the next video. Goodbye.